Hi everyone, welcome back to Horrible Histories Club. This week we're going to look at the Victorians, and in particular looking at the crime and punishment. Okay, so it's called the jailhouse rot. The Victorian poor could end up in jail, if they were lucky. Life outside the slummer was so slummy, it was almost better to be under lock and key. In the early 19th century Britain, masses of people moved to the cities to work in the new factories. This made Britain, or at least the factory owners, very rich. But for most people in the cities, life was horrid. They slaved away in a factory for a tiny bit of money and had to live on top of each other in disgusting, horrid, crowded slums. Many poor people turned to robbing and stealing to survive. It was no surprise when Britain suffered a crime wave. To make things worse, the law was a mess, and there were a few constables in each town. Most of them were interested in taking bribes and staying out of trouble than fighting crime. But if you did get arrested, the punishments would be nasty. Over 200 crimes were punishable by hanging. Sir Robert Peel came along and set up the first professional police force in London. The police were nicknamed Bobbies or Peelers, and similar forces were soon set up across the country. Peel also cut the number of crimes that you could hang for. Although they still had some problems, Peel's police did a reasonable job too. The police headquarters in Great Scotland Yard got a new detective squad for solving mysterious crimes. But Victorian crooks were always coming up with new crimes, like garrotting, strangling, robbing trains and nicking rich kids' clothes. More crooks were getting caught, and fewer hangings meant more people in prison, but many of Britain's prisons were old, grotty and sometimes falling apart. Some convicts got locked up in hulks, big old ships that were used as floating prisons. They were crawling with rats, fleas and disease, and were not nice places to be. Others got transported and sent off to Australia. The answer to prison overcrowding? Build more and mean prisons, like Coldbath Fields and Pentonville, and run them efficiently. Prisoners were kept busy by turning cranks and carrying cannonballs or walking on treadmills. The prison guards tried to use different systems to turn the inmates into law-abiding citizens. These included the separate system, in which prisoners weren't allowed to see anyone, and the silent system, where prisoners weren't supposed to speak at all, but that must have made things a bit difficult. And these systems didn't really work. Life behind bars was tough, but at least the prisoners got regular meals and a place to sleep. In fact, they were better off than many of the poor people outside. But the police and the prisons couldn't clear up all the crime. Take Jack the Ripper. This vile villain murderer murdered 5 women in London, and even the top detectives couldn't catch him, and the people were horrified. But the Victorians loved to be scared, and when they weren't reading about real crimes, they read about made-up murders in nutty papers called penny dreadfuls. Today, the police and the punishments may have changed, but there are still crimes, and we still love to read about them. So have things really changed since the Victorian times? Here we've got a silent prison. A silent system of jails like Coldbath Fields was strict and scary way of making prisoners miserable. Prisoners were made to pick thread from rotten old ropes that were covered in tar. It was fiddly, messy and pretty pointless. New prisoners were dropped off inside the prison walls by a Black Maria. They were stripped, inspected and then given ugly uniforms. If a prisoner misbehaved or made a noise, they got flogged. Try staying silent when you're being whipped. The treadmill was exhausting and dangerous. You just had to climb on and keep treading until you were told to stop. Walking in a circle was regular exercise, but you still couldn't make any noise. One utterly mind-numbing activity was the crank, which turned nothing except a counter, and you had to do it for hours on end. The same food was served each day of the week. The idea was to make the grub as predictable as possible. Sounds a little bit like school, doesn't it? Okay, that's it for this week's Horrible Histories Club. Please tune in next week for the next episode. Thank you.